What if one day, you return to your old house and find the wife you buried years ago still alive living there with a child who has your eyes? Daniel thought he had lost everything in a tragic accident. But when he comes back after nearly a decade, he discovers something far more shocking than death, a lie that stole his family, his time, and his entire life. And the truth, it leads straight to the one person he trusted the most. If you want to know what really happened and how far someone would go to control another person's life, stay with this story. And before we continue, don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next part. Also, I'm curious, where are you watching from right now, and what time is it there? Daniel Hayes had spent the better part of a decade convincing himself that the past was something you could outgrow if you worked hard enough, earned enough, moved far enough. In New York City, that belief was easy to maintain. The city rewarded forward motion. It didn't care who you used to be, only what you could become. Daniel had become someone impressive on paper, at least. His name appeared in business journals, his deals closed in the millions, and his apartment overlooked a skyline that glittered like something unreal. From the outside, it looked like he had built a life that left no room for regret. But there were nights, quiet ones, the kind that stretched too long, when success felt like a well-furnished emptiness. Those were the nights when memories slipped in without asking. A laugh in a kitchen, the smell of coffee brewed too strong, the soft creak of old wooden floors, and always, inevitably, her Clara. He had trained himself not to linger there. Grief, he'd learned, could become a habit if you let it. So he stayed busy. Meetings, flights, negotiations, numbers, things that demanded attention and offered distraction in return. It worked mostly, until the email came. It was routine at first glance, just another property file forwarded by his assistant, a redevelopment opportunity in a small town in Ashfield. Several aging homes, a potential resort project, projected returns outlined in neat, optimistic columns. Daniel would normally have skimmed it, approved the next step, and moved on. But then he saw the address. Maple Ridge Road. His hand paused on the trackpad, just for a second too long. He clicked. The file opened, and there it was, his old house. The one he hadn't seen in 9 years. The one he had locked up and walked away from, like closing a chapter he couldn't bear to reread. The photo in the document showed a tired structure, paint faded, porch slightly tilted, weeds pushing through what used to be a careful lawn. It looked smaller than he remembered, as if time had quietly shrunk it. Daniel leaned back in his chair, eyes still fixed on the screen. For a moment, the city noise outside his window seemed to fade. He could almost hear something else instead, wind through trees, distant silence, the kind that only exists far from places like New York. Sell it, he muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. It made sense. Financially, it was the obvious choice. The land alone was worth more than he ever imagined when he first bought it. Holding on to it served no purpose. It was just a relic, a weight. Still, something in his chest tightened, subtle but persistent, like a warning he didn't want to acknowledge. By the end of the week, he was on a plane. The flight was short, but it felt longer than it should have. Daniel spent most of it staring out the window, watching the landscape shift from dense urban sprawl to quieter stretches of green and gray. He hadn't been back to Massachusetts since the funeral. He'd made sure of that. There had been nothing left for him there, at least. That's what he told himself. A rental car waited for him at the small regional airport. It was nothing like the sleek vehicles he was used to, but he didn't mind. In fact, there was something grounding about it. No driver, no schedule, no polished image to maintain. Just him, a set of keys, and a road that felt strangely familiar. As he drove, the world began to change in ways that felt almost disorienting. The highways narrowed into smaller roads, the buildings gave way to trees. And the air, when he cracked the window open, carried a different kind of smell. Earthwood, something faintly sweet. It hit him with an unexpected force, that scent. Memory didn't ask permission, it just arrived. He passed places he didn't recognize anymore, and others he did, though they looked older, quieter. Diner that used to stay open late now had boarded windows. A gas station had been replaced by something newer, cleaner, less personal. Time had moved on here too, just in a different way. Daniel tightened his grip on the steering wheel as he turned onto Maple Ridge Road. The road itself hadn't changed much. It still curved gently, lined with trees that leaned just enough to create shifting patterns of light and shadow. His house sat near the end, slightly set back like it always had. He spotted it before he was ready to. For a moment he considered driving past it, just continuing on, not stopping, not confronting whatever waited there. But he didn't. He slowed down, pulled into the uneven driveway, and turned off the engine. Silence followed. Not the kind he was used to, the insulated quiet of expensive glass and steel, but something deeper, more complete. It pressed in around him, filling the space where city noise usually lived. Daniel sat there for a few seconds, hands still on the wheel, as if moving too quickly might break something. When he finally stepped out of the car, the air felt cooler than he expected. He adjusted his jacket out of habit, though it wasn't really cold. The ground beneath his shoes crunched softly, gravel shifting under each step. It was a small sound, but in the stillness it seemed louder. Up close, the house looked worse than it had in the photo. The paint had peeled further, exposing dull wood beneath. The porch railing leaned at an angle that suggested it wouldn't take much to give way completely. Windows were streaked, one of them slightly cracked. Abandoned, that's what it was supposed to be. Daniel walked slowly toward the front steps, each one creaking faintly under his weight. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small set of keys, the metal cool against his fingers. He had almost left them behind in New York, thinking he wouldn't need them. Now he was glad he hadn't. He stopped just short of the door. Something felt off. At first, he couldn't place it. Then he noticed the grass. It wasn't uniform. Most of it had grown wild and even unkempt, but near the steps, there was a path subtle, but clear enough if you were looking for it, like someone had been walking there, recently. Daniel frowned slightly, his mind already searching for explanations. Maybe kids. Maybe someone using the place as shelter. It wasn't unheard of. Empty houses attracted attention. Still, the unease didn't go away. He moved closer to one of the front windows and wiped a small patch of grime with the side of his hand. The glass cleared just enough for him to see inside. And that's when his breath caught. There was light. Not the harsh, cold flicker of something forgotten, but a warm, steady glow. The kind that came from a lamp, from a space that was lived in. Shapes formed behind the glass furniture that hadn't been there before. Colors that didn't belong to the abandoned version of this house, he remembered. Daniel stepped back slightly, his heart beginning to beat faster in a way that had nothing to do with business or pressure or deals. Someone was inside. For a brief second, a rational part of his mind tried to take control. It listed possibilities, explanations, things that made sense. But beneath all of that, something else stirred. Something quieter, harder to define. A feeling he hadn't allowed himself to experience in years. He walked to the front door and raised his hand. There was a pause just long enough to notice it. Then he knocked. The sound of his knuckles against the door echoed more than it should have, as if the house itself had been holding its breath for years and didn't quite know how to respond. Daniel stood there, hands still hovering midair, suddenly aware of how strange this was, how impossible it should have been. No one was supposed to be here, he had made sure of that. The utilities had been cut off years ago. The place had been empty, forgotten, frozen in time the way he had left it. And yet there was light, there was movement. There was life. At first, nothing happened, just silence again, stretching thin and tense. Daniel felt his pulse in his throat, steady but heavy, like each beat carried more weight than it should. He almost knocked again, harder this time, ready to assert himself, to demand answers, to remind whoever was inside that this house, this place, belongs to him. Then he heard it. Footsteps. Soft, careful, not the hurried scramble of someone surprised, but the slow, deliberate steps of someone deciding whether or not to open the door. That hesitation did something to him. It made the moment feel fragile, like whatever was about to happen could not be undone. The lock clicked. The door opened just a few inches at first, enough for a sliver of light to spill out onto the porch. A face appeared in the gap, partially hidden, cautious. A woman's voice followed, low but steady. "Can I help you?" Daniel opened his mouth, ready with something sharp, something controlled, some version of himself he used in negotiations, in conflicts, in rooms where he always had the upper hand. But the words never came, because the door opened a little wider. And he saw her. Not just a resemblance, not someone who looked similar, not a trick of memory or grief playing games with him. It was her. Clara. The same eyes, though now they carried something heavier behind them. The same curve of her lips, though they were pressed tight instead of smiling. The same small scar near her chin, the one she used to joke about from when she fell off her bike as a kid. Details his mind couldn't have invented even if it tried. For a second, Daniel genuinely thought he might be losing his mind. That this was some kind of break, some delayed collapse after years of pushing everything down. Because this wasn't possible. It couldn't be. His voice came out rough, barely formed. He couldn't say the word. Dead. Clara's face drained of color the moment she recognized him. The fear in her eyes wasn't subtle, it hit all at once, sharp and immediate. Like she had been caught in something she could no longer hide. Her hand tightened around the edge of the door. "Daniel," she said, his name leaving her like it hurt to say it. They stared at each other, and time did something strange, stretched, folded, blurred. 9 years of absence collapsed into a single moment that neither of them knew how to handle. I saw Daniel swallowed hard, trying to force logic into a situation that had none. They told me you died. I went to your funeral. He stopped, his voice catching as the memory hit him all over again, raw and unresolved. I buried you. Clara didn't respond right away. Her breathing had changed, shallow, controlled, like she was trying to hold something back. And then, before Daniel could say anything else, a voice came from inside the house. Mom! It was small, curious, completely unaware of the weight of what was happening at the door. Daniel's entire body tensed. Footsteps followed quicker this time, lighter, a child's steps, and then she appeared. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, with slightly messy brown hair pulled into a loose ponytail. She wore a faded sweater, sleeves a bit too long, and held onto the doorframe as she peeked around Clara. Her eyes found Daniel's, and something in him shifted so violently it almost felt physical. Green. The exact same shade as his. Not similar, not close, identical. The girl looked at him with open curiosity at first, then uncertainty as she noticed the tension in the air. Mom, who is that? She asked quietly, stepping a little closer but still staying near Clara. Clara moved immediately, instinctively, placing a hand on the girl's shoulder, pulling her slightly behind her. It wasn't aggressive, it was protective, automatic. The kind of movement you don't think about, you just do. Daniel noticed that. Of course he did. His mind was already racing, connecting things faster than he could process them, the age, the timing, the eyes. The way the girl stood, the way her expression shifted, it all felt too familiar, too precise to be coincidence. Clara, his voice dropped, unsteady now. Who is she? Clara's jaw tightened. For a moment it looked like she might not answer at all. Her gaze flickered between Daniel and the girl, calculating, bracing. When she finally spoke, her voice was colder than he had ever heard it. Her name is Emily. Daniel barely heard the name. His focus was locked somewhere else, somewhere deeper. Is she? He hesitated, the question feeling too big, too irreversible once spoken. Is she mine? The silence that followed was louder than anything else. Emily shifted slightly, sensing the tension even if she didn't understand it. She looked up at Clara, then back at Daniel, her brows knitting together. Mom, what's going on? She asked, a hint of worry creeping into her voice now. Clara didn't answer her. She kept her eyes on Daniel, and in them, there was something complicated, anger, fear, something that might have been hurt, buried under years of survival. You need to leave, she said finally. The words hit harder than Daniel expected. What? You heard me. Her voice didn't rise, but it sharpened. This isn't your place anymore. That's not true, Daniel shot back, confusion and disbelief bleeding into his tone. This is my house. Clara, what is happening? You re-alive, there's a child, my child, and you retelling me to just walk away. You already did, she said, and this time there was no hiding the emotion behind it. The words landed like a blow. Daniel shook his head immediately. No, that's not, don't do that. Don't twist this. I thought you were dead. They told me you died in that fire. What was I supposed to do? Clara, dig up a coffin, fight a ghost. You were supposed to question it, she snapped, the control in her voice cracking just enough to reveal what was underneath. You were supposed to wonder why there was no body, why everything felt off. But you didn't, you accepted it. You moved on. I didn't move on, Daniel said, quieter now, but no less intense. You think I moved on? I left because I couldn't breathe in that house without you. Every room felt like it was still waiting for you to walk in. I didn't forget you, Clara, not for a second. Emily watched them wide, trying to piece together something far beyond her years. Mom, I'm scared, she whispered, reaching for Clara's hand. Clara softened immediately at that, crouching slightly to bring herself closer to the girl. Hey, it's okay, she said gently, brushing a strand of hair away from Emily's face. Everything's okay, I promise. Daniel stood there, just outside the doorway, feeling like he was watching a life that should have been his happening without him. That realization hurt more than anything else. Clara stood back up, her expression hardening again as she looked at him. You need to go, she repeated, quieter this time but no less firm. Whatever you think this is, whatever you want from us, you don't get to just walk back in after 9 years and expect things to make sense. I don't expect anything to make sense, Daniel said, his voice almost breaking now. I just want the truth. You don't get today, she replied. And before he could stop her, before he could say anything else, she reached for the door. For a brief second their eyes met again, his full of questions, hers full of things she refused to say. Then the door closed. The sound was final, heavy. Daniel stood there, staring at the wood like it might open again if he waited long enough. But it didn't. Inside he could faintly hear Emily's voice, muffled now, asking questions Clara wasn't ready to answer. And outside Daniel realized that everything he thought he understood about his life had just been undone in the span of a few minutes. Daniel didn't leave right away after the door closed. For a long time, he just stood there on the porch, staring at the chipped paint like it might crack open and give him answers. His mind kept replaying the same images in a loop: Clara's face, pale and tense. The way she said his name like it belonged to a past she didn't want back, and most of all, the girl, Emily. The way she looked at him, curious but cautious, like she could sense something important without understanding what it was. Like a piece of him had been standing right there, just out of reach. Eventually the cold started to creep in, or maybe it was just the weight of everything settling into his bones. He walked back to his car, and sat inside without starting the engine. The silence followed him again, but this time it wasn't peaceful. It pressed in heavy, suffocating. He leaned back, staring at the steering wheel, trying to make sense of something that refused to be logical. Clara was alive. Not missing, not mistaken, alive. And she had been all this time. Which meant one thing he couldn't ignore anymore: someone had lied to him. Not just a small lie, not something that could be explained away or misunderstood. This was something else entirely, something deliberate. He thought back to that day 9 years ago, the phone call, the rushed voices, the official tone that left no room for questions. "There's been an accident, the vehicle caught fire, we're sorry for your loss." He remembered how quickly everything had moved after that. The paperwork, the arrangements, the closed casket. At the time, he had been too broken to question it. Grief had a way of shutting down logic, of making you accept whatever explanation hurt the least to understand. But now every detail felt wrong. Why had the casket been closed? Why had he never been asked to identify anything? Why had there been no real investigation, no lingering uncertainty, no follow-up? It had all been so clean, too clean. Daniel ran a hand over his face, exhaling slowly. There was only one way forward now. He needed answers, not guesses. And Clara, whether she liked it or not, was the only person who could give them. The next morning he was back. This time he didn't knock right away. He sat in his car across the street, watching. The house looked different in daylight. Less mysterious, more real. He could see the small signs of life more clearly now: a curtain slightly pulled back, a pair of shoes by the door, a small backpack resting against the wall inside the entryway. At around 8:30, the door opened. Clara stepped out first, dressed simply, her hair tied back. She looked tired in a way that went beyond lack of sleep, like someone who had been carrying too much for too long. Emily followed, struggling slightly with the straps of her backpack before Clara leaned down and adjusted them for her. The gesture was small, automatic, filled with a kind of quiet care that made Daniel's chest tighten. They walked down the path together, Emily talking about something he couldn't hear, her hands moving as she spoke. Clara nodded occasionally, a faint smile appearing and disappearing, like she wasn't quite allowing herself to feel it fully. They looked like a normal family. Except he wasn't part of it. Daniel waited until they turned the corner and disappeared before he got out of the car. He told himself this was necessary, that he wasn't crossing a line, but even as he thought it, he knew he was. Still, the need to understand outweighed everything else. The key still worked. That somehow made it worse. The door opened with a soft creak, and Daniel stepped inside slowly, as if the house might reject him if he moved too fast. The smell hit him first, not dust or decay, but something warm, lived in. Faint traces of cooking, soap, something sweet he couldn't quite place. It wasn't abandoned. It was a home. He moved through the living room, taking in the changes. The old furniture was gone, replaced by simple, worn pieces. A couch with a blanket draped over one side, a small table covered in crayons and paper. Drawings taped to the walls, bright, uneven, full of color. One of them caught his attention: a house, a woman, a little girl, no man. He swallowed hard and kept moving. The kitchen was modest but clean, 2 plates drying by the sink, 2 cups, everything spoke a careful use of making do with just enough. On the counter there was a small jar filled with coins and a few folded bills. Daniel didn't mean to look, but he did. Not much, barely enough to get through a week comfortably. The realization hit him quietly but firmly: while he had been building a life of excess, Clara had been surviving. Alone. He made his way upstairs, each step creaking in a way that felt too loud in the silence. The first room he opened was clearly Emily's, a small bed, neatly made, books stacked in uneven piles. A few toys, all well used but cared for. On the desk there were school papers. He picked one up. Emily Carter. The name lingered. Carter, not Hayes. Of course. He set the paper down carefully, as if it might break under too much pressure. His gaze moved around the room again, taking in the details. This was where she had grown up. This was where his daughter had lived her entire life. Without him, the next room was Clara's. It was even simpler, a narrow bed, a dresser with a slightly cracked mirror. On top of it sat a small photo frame. Daniel stepped closer. It was a picture of Emily as a baby. Wrapped in a blanket, eyes closed, tiny and impossibly fragile. He stared at it longer than he intended, something heavy settling in his chest. Next to the frame was a worn envelope. He hesitated. This wasn't his to look at, he knew that. Every instinct told him to leave it alone. But the questions were louder than his sense of boundaries. He opened it. Inside were documents, medical bills mostly, numbers that added up quickly, amounts that spoke of stress and sacrifice. Some were marked paid. Others weren't. At the bottom, there was something else. A birth certificate. Daniel's hands went still. Name Emily Grace Carter. Mother Clara Carter. Father? Blank. Not unknown, not missing. Just empty. He sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, the paper still in his hands. His mind did the math automatically, the date, the timeline, everything lined up too perfectly to deny. She had been pregnant when she disappeared. Pregnant with his child. And he had never known. Why? The word slipped out before he could stop it, quiet and raw. Why didn't you tell me? But even as he asked it, something else began to take shape in his mind. A different question, a harder one. Who made sure he never knew? A sound downstairs cut through his thoughts, the front door opening. Daniel froze. Footsteps followed, 2 sets, one light, one heavier, voices faint but unmistakable. They were back. His heart kicked into overdrive, adrenaline flooding in all at once. He stood up too quickly, the room spinning for a second before he steadied himself. He shouldn't be here, not like this. Not in their space, uninvited, going through pieces of a life he had no right to touch. But it was too late now. Emily, go wash your hands, Clara's voice called from downstairs, calm but tired. Okay, Emily replied. Footsteps on the stairs. Coming up, Daniel stepped into the hallway just as Emily reached the top. They saw each other at the same time. And everything stopped. Daniel didn't remember most of the drive back to New York. The highway blurred into a gray ribbon, exits passing like seconds he couldn't account for. His hands stayed on the wheel, steady out of habit, but his mind was somewhere else entirely, back in that house, in that hallway. In the moment, Emily looked at him like he didn't belong. By the time the skyline of New York City rose into view, sharp and indifferent as ever, something inside him had already shifted. The life he had built here, clean, controlled, predictable, no longer felt like something he could hide inside. He didn't go home first. Instead, he drove straight to the Upper East Side, to the house he hadn't visited in months. It stood exactly as it always had, tall, immaculate, every detail curated to reflect power and permanence. The kind of place that didn't just belong to someone, but made a statement about who they were. Or who they believed they were. Daniel parked, stepped out, and walked up the stone steps without hesitation. He didn't call ahead. He didn't give warning. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to happen on her terms. He let himself in. Mother! His voice carried through the house, sharp enough to cut through the usual quiet. There was a pause, then the faint sound of heels on marble, slow, controlled, familiar. Margaret Hayes appeared at the top of the staircase like nothing in the world could surprise her. She wore a tailored cream suit, her posture perfect, her expression composed in a way that had once made Daniel feel safe. Now it made something in his stomach turn. Daniel, she said, her tone light, almost pleased. This is unexpected. He didn't move closer. Clara's alive. The words landed between them, heavy and irreversible. For a brief second, just a fraction, something flickered in Margaret's eyes. Not shock, not confusion. Recognition. Then it was gone, replaced by calm. I see, she said, descending the stairs as if they were discussing something trivial. And what exactly do you mean by that? Don't do that. Daniel's voice hardened. Don't pretend you don't understand. I saw her. I spoke to her. She's been alive this entire time. Margaret reached the bottom step and walked past him into the living room unhurried. Daniel, she said, almost gently, grief can do strange things. You should sit down. I'm not confused, he snapped, following her, and I'm not imagining things. She told me everything. That made her stop. Not dramatically, just enough. Everything, she repeated. Yes, Daniel took a step closer, his pulse rising but his voice steady. About the threats, about the money, about the fire, about how you made it look like she died. Silence stretched between them. Margaret turned slowly, studying him in a way that felt less like a mother looking at her son and more like someone assessing a situation. Calculating. And you believed her, she asked. Daniel let out a breath that was almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. You really think this is about belief? I saw her, Mom, I saw my daughter. That word hung in the air. Daughter. For the first time, something shifted in Margaret's expression. Subtle but there. She has a child, she asked. 8 years old, Daniel said, which means Clara was pregnant when she died. When you told me she died. Margaret didn't respond immediately. She walked to the window, looking out at the perfectly maintained garden, as if this conversation was happening somewhere far away from her. "You always did have a tendency to rush to conclusions," she said finally. Daniel stared at her, something cold settling into place inside him. "So you were not even going to deny it?" That made her turn back. "No," she said. Just like that. No hesitation, no apology. "I'm not." The simplicity of it hit harder than any argument could have. Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. He stopped, running a hand through his hair, trying to keep himself from losing control. "You made me believe my wife was dead. I removed a problem," Margaret corrected calmly. "A problem," his voice cracked, the word breaking under the weight of everything behind it. "She was my wife. She was a distraction," Margaret said. "An emotional liability that was already affecting your judgment." Daniel took a step back like she had struck him. "You were talking about a person, about someone I loved." "And I'm talking about your future," she replied, her tone sharpening slightly for the first time. "A future you were about to throw away." What he demanded, for being happy, for being small, she said. The word landed with a finality that made something in Daniel's chest twist. "She had nothing to offer you," Margaret continued. "No background, no connections, no understanding of the world you were meant to operate in. You were building something, Daniel, something significant, and she was going to reduce you to what? A quiet life in a small town. That's not who you are." "That is exactly who I was," he shot back, "before you decided to interfere. I decided to protect you. You destroyed my life." Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly. "Your life," she repeated. "Look at yourself. Everything you have now, the success, the respect that wouldn't exist if you had stayed with her. And what does it matter?" Daniel asked, his voice dropping, quieter now but far more dangerous. "If it's all built on a lie." For the first time, Margaret didn't have an immediate answer. It was small, almost nothing. But Daniel saw it. "You don't regret it," he said slowly, the realization settling in piece by piece. "No," she replied. There was no hesitation. "I did what needed to be done." Daniel let out a breath, shaking his head as if trying to clear something that wouldn't go away. "You threatened her," he said. "You made her disappear, you staged a death. Do you even hear yourself?" "I hear someone who was willing to make difficult decisions when you couldn't," she said. "That's the difference between us." "That's not strength," Daniel said. "That's cruelty. That's perspective." "No," he snapped. "That's control. That's you deciding that your version of my life mattered more than my actual life." Margaret's expression hardened, "Because your version was flawed, and yours was a lie." The room fell silent again, but this time it felt different, tighter. Like something had finally broken past the point of repair. Daniel looked at her, really looked this time, without the filter of who he thought she was. The woman in front of him wasn't someone he recognized anymore. Or maybe she had always been this way, and he just hadn't wanted to see it. "I have a daughter," he said, quieter now, but each word deliberate, 8 years old. "She grew up without a father because of you." "That was unfortunate," Margaret said, though her tone suggested she didn't find it particularly tragic. "But necessary." Daniel closed his eyes for a second, steadying himself. When he opened them again, whatever hesitation had been there before was gone. "I'm going to fix this," he said. Margaret tilted her head slightly. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" "I'm going to make sure Clara and Emily are safe. I'm going to tell the truth. And I'm going to make sure what you did doesn't stay buried." A small, almost amused smile touched her lips. "You think anyone will believe you?" "I don't care if they do," Daniel said. "I care that it's true. You were willing to destroy your own family over this." "You already did that," he replied. That was the moment something changed. Margaret's composure didn't disappear, but it sharpened into something colder, more defined. "If you go down this path," she said, her voice low now, "you won't be able to come back from it." Daniel held her gaze. "I'm not planning to." "Then you should be prepared for consequences." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm warning you," she said. "You're not the only one who knows how to play this game." For a second, the old instinct kicked in, the part of him that understood power, leverage, risk. The part that knew exactly what she was capable of. But then he thought of Emily, of the way she stood behind Clara, uncertain, protective of a life that had been built without him. And the fear faded. "Then I guess we will see who's better at it," he said quietly. Margaret studied him for a long moment, as if searching for something, doubt, hesitation, anything she could use. She didn't find it. "Very well," she said finally. Daniel didn't say anything else. There was nothing left to say. He turned and walked toward the door, each step feeling heavier and lighter at the same time. When he reached it, he paused, not because he was unsure, but because he understood exactly what this meant. Then he opened it and walked out. For the first time in years, Daniel Hayes wasn't thinking about deals or numbers or outcomes. He was thinking about a war he hadn't chosen, but one he was finally ready to fight. Daniel didn't waste time. By the time he left his mother's house, the sun had already started to dip behind the skyline, casting long shadows across the city that once made him feel untouchable. Now every reflection in the glass buildings felt different, like they were showing him someone he didn't fully recognize anymore. Someone who had spent years building control, only to realize how little of his own life he had actually understood. He got into his car and drove straight out of the city. No calls, no tours, no second thoughts. The road stretched ahead of him, darkening by the minute, and for once, Daniel wasn't thinking about strategy or consequences. He was thinking about time, 8 years of it, gone. 8 years of birthdays he missed, of first words, first steps, small moments that never come back once they pass. That thought stayed with him the entire drive, heavier than anything his mother had said. By the time he reached Ashfield, night had settled in completely. The house on Maple Ridge Road looked different in the dark. The soft yellow light from inside spilled onto the porch, faint but steady, like something fragile trying to hold its ground. Daniel parked a few feet away this time, not pulling all the way into the driveway. It felt different now, like he was approaching something that didn't belong to him yet. He walked up to the door and knocked, not as forcefully as before. There was movement inside, quicker this time, less hesitation. The door opened and Clara stood there, her expression tightening the moment she saw him again. "I told you." "I know," Daniel cut in gently, not raising his voice. "I know what you said. I'm not here to argue." That alone made her pause. Something in his tone had changed. The edge was still there, but it wasn't sharp in the same way. It wasn't pushing, it was steady. "I talked to her," he said. Clara didn't need to ask who. Her face went still and she admitted it. The words landed quietly, but their weight was immediate. For a second, Clara didn't react at all. Then she let out a breath she didn't seem to realize she'd been holding, her shoulders lowering just slightly. "Of course she did," she said, though there was no satisfaction in it, just exhaustion. Daniel glanced past her instinctively, like he was checking, "Where's Emily?" "In her room," Clara said. "She didn't sleep well last night." He nodded. That made sense. "I need you to listen to me," he said, bringing his focus back to Clara. "My mother already started moving. She called my office. She's trying to report you for living here illegally." Clara's expression shifted instantly. "What?" "She's going to push this as far as she can," Daniel continued. "If the police show up, this turns into something bigger. And she knows it." Clara ran a hand through her hair, pacing once across the small entryway. No, this can't, Daniel. "If they take me in, if this becomes a legal case," Emily, her voice caught, and she stopped herself, pressing her lips together. "I'm not letting that happen," he said firmly. She looked at him, searching his face like she was trying to decide whether that meant anything. "You don't understand how this works," she said quietly. "Your mother, she has people, lawyers, influence. She doesn't need to be right. She just needs to be louder." "Then we don't let her control the narrative," Daniel replied. Clara gave a short, humorless laugh. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" "Walk into a police station and say, 'Hey, my mother faked my wife's death 8 years ago.' You think anyone's going to believe that without proof?" That word hung there. Proof. Daniel nodded slowly. "You rewrite. We need it." "And where do we get that?" Clara asked. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, not because he didn't have an idea, but because saying it out loud made it real. "My father." Clara frowned slightly. "Your father?" "They divorced 3 years ago," Daniel said. "It wasn't clean. He didn't trust her. He kept records, financials, transactions, things he thought she might be hiding." Clara's expression shifted, cautious but hopeful. "You think there's something in there?" "I think if she paid people to do what she did, it's somewhere," Daniel said. "Money always leaves a trail." Before Clara could respond, they both heard a soft creak from the stairs. Emily stood there, halfway down, clutching the railing. She must have been listening. Her eyes moved between them, unsure. "Mom, are we in trouble?" The question hit harder than anything else. Clara moved immediately, crossing the room and kneeling in front of her. "Hey," she said softly, brushing Emily's hair back. "No, baby. Everything's okay." Emily didn't look convinced. Her gaze shifted to Daniel, lingering there longer this time. Not just fear now, curiosity, something else. "Is he staying again?" she asked. Clara hesitated. Just for a second. And Daniel felt it. That space, that uncertainty, that moment where something could change or close off completely. "I don't know yet," Clara said finally. It wasn't rejection, but it wasn't acceptance either. Daniel stepped forward slowly, careful not to crowd her. "Emily," he said gently, keeping his voice low, calm, "I know this is a lot, and I know I'm a stranger to you." Emily didn't say anything, but she didn't look away either. "I'm not here to hurt you," he continued. "I'm here to make sure you and your mom are safe. That's all." Emily studied him for a moment, like she was trying to decide something important. People say things like that, she said quietly, and then they leave. The words were simple, but they cut deeper than anything else. Daniel swallowed, nodding once. Yeah, he softly, sometimes they do. Clara looked at him then, something unreadable passing through her expression. But I'm not going anywhere, he added, and this time there was no hesitation in his voice. Not this time. Emily glanced at her mother again, silently asking for confirmation. Clara didn't speak right away. She just held her daughter's hand, her thumb brushing over it absent-mindedly, thinking. Then slowly she nodded. Okay, Emily said, though it came out more like a quiet acceptance than belief. Can you go back upstairs for a bit? Clara asked gently. We need to talk about some things. Emily hesitated, then nodded again and turned, heading back up the stairs. Her footsteps were softer this time. When her door closed, the house felt different. Quieter, but not empty. Clara stood up, exhaling slowly. If we do this, she said, turning back to Daniel, there's no going back. I know. She's not going to stop, Clara added. Not once she realizes we were pushing back. I know that too. And if this fails, it won't, Daniel said. She held his gaze. You can't promise that. No, he admitted, but I can promise I won't walk away again. That seemed to land somewhere. Not fully, not yet. But enough. Clara nodded once, like she was making a decision she wasn't entirely ready for but couldn't avoid. Then we start now, she said. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. There was one call he needed to make, one door left to open. As the line began to ring, he glanced toward the stairs, toward the room where his daughter was sitting, probably trying to understand a world that had just shifted under her feet. And for the first time since all of this began, Daniel didn't feel lost. He felt focused. Because this wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about what came next. Some stories don't stay with you because of the twists, they stay because they feel uncomfortably real. This is one of those stories. What lingers isn't just the betrayal or the hidden truth. It's the quiet realization that sometimes the biggest tragedies in life don't come from accidents, they come from silence, from assumptions, from trusting the wrong person without ever asking the right questions. Daniel wasn't a bad man. He was a broken one who accepted what he was told because it hurt too much to look deeper. But the cost of that acceptance was 8 years of a life he should have lived, of a daughter he never knew, of a love that never really ended. Clara, on the other hand, didn't get the luxury of grieving or moving on. She had to survive. She had to rebuild everything from nothing, not because she wanted to, but because she had no other choice. There's something painfully human about that, how strength often comes from being cornered, not from being ready. And then there's the mother. What makes her frightening isn't just what she did, but the fact that she truly believed she was right, that she was protecting her son. It reminds us of something uncomfortable. People don't always see themselves as villains. Sometimes they justify the damage they cause in the name of love, control, or what's best. If there's a lesson here, it's not simple or clean, it's layered. Don't stop questioning even when the truth is painful. Don't confuse control with care. And don't assume that time will fix what silence has buried. Because in the end, time doesn't heal everything, it just hides things better. But there's also something hopeful in this story. Even after everything, Daniel still has a choice. He can't take back the past, but he can decide what kind of man he'll be from this moment forward. And sometimes that's the only kind of redemption we get. Not a second chance at the past, but a refusal to lose the future too.